Something big is shifting in the global chip war, and almost no one has noticed it yet. As Washington tightens the noose to block Beijing's access to advanced technology, China has quietly found its counterstrike. And the first country feeling the heat isn't America, it's the Netherlands. By trying to stand with the US against China's chip industry, the Dutch government has stumbled into a crisis that's now shaking Europe's manufacturing base. Supply lines are breaking, industries are halting, and the blame is falling squarely on The Hague for mishandling the fallout. It all started when Dutch regulators forced the Chinese-owned semiconductor firm Nexperia to sell off its operations inside the Netherlands, calling it a move to protect national security. To them, it was a defensive measure, a way to keep control of Europe's chip infrastructure. But to Beijing, it was an attack, and their response was swift. Within days, China's retaliation exposed a harsh truth that Europe had been ignoring. Its technology and manufacturing lifelines still run through China. Most people have never heard of Nexperia, yet it's one of the quiet powerhouses behind modern electronics. Based in Nijmegen and once part of Philips, the company was sold to China's Wingtech Technology in 2019, a deal that fit perfectly into Beijing's plan to dominate the electronics supply chain. Unlike chip giants such as Intel or Nvidia, Nexperia doesn't make flashy processors for AI or supercomputers. It produces something more fundamental: small, steady components that manage power and current inside almost every device on Earth. Cars, appliances, phones, even hospital machines rely on them. Remove those chips, and daily life grinds to a halt. That's what made the Dutch government's decision so explosive. By cutting off a Chinese parent company, it didn't just hit one business. It disrupted the arteries of global production. Western leaders often talk about advanced nanometer chips and the race for AI dominance. But the truth is, the world runs on simpler semiconductors, the ones no one pays attention to. And China quietly controls most of them. Right now, Beijing produces nearly half of the world's integrated circuits, more than 60% of discrete chips, and around 70% of passive parts like resistors and capacitors. These tiny components are built in vast factories scattered across Guangdong, Shenzhen, and Jiangsu, and they're inside nearly every electronic product with a Western logo. Even when a chip says Nexperia, Infineon, or ST Microelectronics, there's a good chance it was made in a Chinese facility. That's why Europe's top manufacturers are worried. German automakers like Bosch have warned that if China halts shipments, the entire European car sector could freeze. And that's not an exaggeration. Just a few years ago, a single fire at a Japanese chip plant caused global vehicle output to drop by 10%. Imagine what would happen if an entire country like China stopped exporting components for even 1 month. Beijing has learned that it doesn't need to fight sanctions directly. It just needs to control the supply lines the West can't live without. What's happening now shows that the chip war has entered a new stage. It's no longer about who can make the most advanced processors, but who controls the parts the world depends on every day. The United States may have started this war, but China is now the one dictating the rules. Beijing now holds a kind of leverage that few seem willing to admit. Yet Washington keeps selling the illusion that the real race is about artificial intelligence. It's a clever distraction. While the US pours billions into futuristic chip plants that won't function for years, it overlooks the most ordinary parts needed to keep industries running today. It's like trying to launch a rocket when you haven't built the bolts to hold it together. Across the Atlantic, Europe isn't faring much better. The European Chips Act was announced with great pride, but most of its funding flows into high-end lithography and 3-nanometer research. Technologies that do nothing to solve the shortages shutting down European production lines right now. German automakers plead for basic power chips, but the supply chain still runs through Asia. China saw this imbalance long before anyone else. Years ago, it began investing heavily in the very segments the West ignored, the low and mid-range chips that quietly power everything from cars to medical devices. It never needed to challenge the US in AI processors. It simply took control of the components that the world can't live without. The same mistake happened before, with rare earth metals. The West dismissed their importance until China had already seized over 80% of refining and production. And when Beijing even hinted at tightening exports back in 2010, global markets went into panic within hours. Now, that same trap has been rebuilt, only this time the prize is far more critical. Every modern industry, automotive, energy, defense, communications, healthcare, runs on these unglamorous low-cost chips. Without them, even a hospital or a power grid can shut down. The harsh truth is that China now controls the industrial lifeblood of the world economy. America can boast about its AI ambitions all it wants. But if Beijing cuts the supply of basic semiconductors, it's the West that will run out of air first. And the unsettling part is that China doesn't need to lift a weapon, just stop the flow. When Donald Trump met Xi Jinping in what the media called a reset for US-China trade relations, Washington celebrated it as a breakthrough. After months of export bans and rising tensions, Trump announced that China had agreed to ease certain semiconductor restrictions and resume-limited component shipments to American firms. It sounded like progress, but the real power move came from Beijing. China never surrendered control. It merely chose when to turn the tap. In the days after that meeting, outlets like Global Times and Qin quietly reported that a few Chinese companies were granted permission to export mid-tier chips and critical electronics to Western manufacturers. The list included auto semiconductors, microcontrollers, and power management chips, the same items previously caught in the crossfire. But every deal came with conditions. Recipients had to prove they weren't linked to US sanctions or military use. Beijing still dictated the rules. The US tried to spin this as a diplomatic win, but in truth, it revealed who held the leverage. Washington wasn't chasing peace, it was chasing supply. With car plants in Detroit slowing down and European factories halting production, the US needed China more than it wanted to admit. Domestic chip making can't meet demand, and without Beijing's cooperation, key industries would face shutdowns within weeks. The brilliance of China's move lies in its subtlety. It didn't need to sign any treaty or make concessions. By appearing flexible, it managed to reinforce control. Analysts from Bloomberg Intelligence and Nikkei Asia observed that China was using this moment to appear cooperative while quietly maintaining its dominance over supply chains. In short, Beijing allowed the West to breathe, just enough to stay dependent. Symbolically, it's a masterstroke. China has shown it can control the rhythm of global trade, deciding who gets what and when. Trump may have presented it as a mutual step forward, but the reality is that China now sets the pace. It's no longer reacting. It's directing. Yes, some shipments have resumed, but only because Beijing wants them to. The balance of power has shifted, and Washington can feel it. Meanwhile, Europe is becoming the first casualty. Car makers like Nissan, Volkswagen, and BMW are warning of delays, layoffs, and possible production halts, all because of missing Nexperia chips. These aren't high-end parts. They're the everyday components that keep assembly lines running. When they're gone, everything stops. That's the danger. Supply disruptions from China don't just slow output, they paralyze entire economies. The Netherlands can take ownership of Nexperia, but it can't rebuild China's factories overnight. Germany, desperate to keep its auto sector alive, is now negotiating directly with Beijing to restore shipments. Think about that. Berlin, one of Washington's closest allies, bypassing the US to talk to China. That's how leverage disappears. When Europe's largest economy turns to Beijing instead of Washington, it signals a fundamental shift in power. China's counter-strategy doesn't rely on sanctions or threats. It simply delays, withholds, or slows approvals. Every lost shipment bleeds millions from Western industries, and as losses mount, these same companies start looking to China for relief. Slowly, dependency grows, and beneath the political speeches about reducing risk, the reality is that Europe can't function without Beijing's cooperation. That's the quiet power of control. No war, no noise. Just influence. So what do you think? Can Europe still pull itself out of China's grip? Or has it already sunk too deep? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.